guess Juanita is missing.
No,
I'm here.
he's here.
Oh, okay.
Teresa is here, Janelle's here, Julie's here, Kate's here, and Juanita's here. Whoops. All of the committee members are in attendance. That being said, I'm going to turn the meeting over quickly and as I said before, welcome back, Dr. Casimira.
Yes,
Good
welcome.
to you.
Thank you very much.
Over to Mike Weaver. I'm not sure whether Angela is on. I can't see her name.
She is.
She is, okay. So why don't you guys start with the statement that's the first item on the agenda.
Sure. I'm gonna pull it up here on the screen in case someone doesn't have it.
And like I see on my copy, the pages were numbered. Don't know if everybody else has it.
They should be, yes.
Yeah, I think that's a big improvement. Thank you.
I didn't get it.
Yeah, was an attachment.
It's on the lower right-hand screen.
Yeah. Oh.
I'm just trying to share my screen here. Give me 1 second.
Teresa, it's on the email that Kara sent us.
I mean, I've got the report, but I don't have numbers or page
Oh,
numbers.
it should be on the top of the right.
I don't have a top or bottom. I don't know if they got cut off in the.
No, my pages are type is not numbered either, Teresa.
Okay.
They must have
Thank
got
you.
And
cut
I was
off.
going to get on Mike about that because at the last meeting they were numbered, and I hope that very helpful.
It's helpful, yeah.
No, it didn't cut off. They just mine's not numbered.
The attachment that I received has numbers on the bottom right corner.
Right.
Same as mine.
I got like chicken scratches.
Yeah, you see it says one.
No, they were numbered. Thank you, Mike.
That was Angela took the time to number them by hand because we couldn't figure out how to get it done electronically. But okay.
Well, I appreciate the effort, but they look like scratches and they're not consistent.
Ours are clearly numbered, Teresa.
Well, it must have been a different document then than what I got.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's try to improve it next time. Mike, start with the comments.
Sure. Yeah, so these are the financials for the month ending July 31st. The most significant thing here we'll talk about in a minute was a reclass that we've made in salaries and benefits. But for the month, we came in at 8.6 or $8.7 million for the month, which is typically it's a little bit lower than where we usually sit, and that's due to that year-to-date reclass. We'll talk about in a minute. As far as the year-to-date goes, for the year-to-date expenditures, we're at 70.9, so just about $71 million, and we have about $80.6 million encumbered on top of that against that budget of which we see is $160 million. That's putting us at a favorable balance right now. So if the year were to end right now, we'd have an $8.5 million favorable variance. And again, that variance, as we'll see on the next page, is largely driven by salaries and by benefits. And this is the page I'm talking about, the summary page. We'll see here, this is the 8.6 or $8.7 million, with the $71 million expended and the $81 million encumbered.
Mike, can I just interrupt you?
Sure.
Just quickly, initially, you mentioned there was the statement for January 31st, right? And the headings here that you have from January 1st, 25 to 1/31/25. I would think the heading should be for something like the 7-month period, July through January.
I think we flip-flopped. I think we had it last time, and then we said we were going to change it to the month because this is
Okay, yes.
presenting the month to date. But whatever's easier. This sheet represents both the month to date and the year to date
yeah.
expenses. So
Okay, it's a moot point. We'll clean that up.
sure.
The
Again,
$8 million, the $8 million is very favorable at this particular point. Are there, or just finish, go ahead.
yeah, and again, that $8 million is partially due to a favorable salary line, favorable salary lines. We're about $4.8 million favorable in salary. That's due to two things really. One is open positions, but two, we have also made a year-to-date reclass, taking people out of the general fund and putting them correctly into the Alliance grant. Kara had us working through that task. It took us a little bit longer than usual, and along with that, we moved their benefits. So the benefits are also favorable, and that is also because there are open positions, so people not having insurance because they're not here, as well as the reclassification of the benefits for the folks that were that went into the Alliance grant. And then the last very favorable item is supplies. We'll talk about that shortly, but that's driven mostly by electric, a favorable variance in electric, about $600,000 favorable in electric, and I think that's really due to timing. As the summer months come and it starts to warm up, using more electric, we'll be using less fuel to heat the buildings and more electric to cool the buildings. Following pages by line item, as we typically see every month. The first section is on salaries. And Rich, I know one of the variances that we point out every month was the fact that there were people in an expiring ESSER grant that were moved to the general fund. And when the person had moved them over to the general fund, instead of allocating them correctly to the correct account codes, they put them all in one to keep track of them. And that account code that was used was PT, or part-time printing.
Oh, that's,
So
yeah, that's the $1 million negative number.
Yep. So you'll see part-time printing here. That's the last one. There is no budget for part-time printing, but you'll see month to date we moved $1.5 million out. There is still one or two positions I think we just missed, so we'll clean that up next time. But this reclass, Angela worked on all month to do. It's kind of a time-consuming task to move everyone. Moving one person takes quite a few minutes, and you have to kind of take note of the screen to move them to make sure they move correctly. So luckily, Angela was able to spend some extra time and get them moved, in addition to moving all the folks from general fund into Alliance.
Okay, so these adjustments are important adjustments and a retroactive adjustment, although the initial accounting in terms of presenting the statement was misconstrued. So these adjustments now are making corrections the way they should be, therefore distorting particular period for which these things were
Correct.
done in.
Yeah. So month to date, it looks like we had a very good month when
Right.
in reality, it's just because the year-to-date reclassification happened in this one current period. We try not to do that the best we can, to get everything right the first time, but so you'll see that in salaries. We moved the part-time printing, and then we also moved benefits here. So you'll see that health insurance is also favorable. Again, that's due to open positions, and it's also due to the reclassification of benefits for the folks that were in the general fund and now have moved over to Alliance.
Now, Mike, previously, and I assume you're still in a process of doing the cleanup, as we talked about before, in going through the variances and understanding some of the makeup of the budget. And that's how this stuff is coming about. Where do you stand in terms of a completion where you feel you have a good handle on the saying that now you know pretty much what's in the budget numbers and they have the actual appropriately charged against those line numbers? You think you need another month or two, or?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Yes. And some of them, Rich, some of the numbers that are in here, we just don't have any notes for. So it's very difficult to say, from a variance perspective, what was being budgeted in those lines. But we're trying our best as we work through the financials and as we see these variances to dig into them in between, doing the audit and the budget. We're trying to dig into them and kind of, and also, Rich, along those lines, as we walk through these, Dr. Casimiro will present her these financials as well. And one of the things that we're cognizant of is just to make sure that the narrative that we put forth for the budget is holding true with our monthly financials, so that the budget that we see that here. Two good lines just to point that out is unemployment compensation. You'll see here has a favorable variance of $198,750. And if you remember, when we looked at the budget, that was one of the lines that I chose to reduce because it looked like for this current year we were slightly over budgeted. So that is holding true. And conversely, workers' compensation, the line above it, this negative 23,000, that is likely going to grow negative, and that is because the amount of workers' compensation that we're experiencing compared to the budget is very high. So that was an increase in the budget. So just to give you an example of some of the other analysis that we do on kind of back of the envelope as we go through these statements.
I do appreciate the work that you're doing, on this and the time that you've done to do that in the audit and in the audits. But again, to everybody's point, the more that we get these numbers cleaned up, the better off we are, so we understand our position. Get past this particular hurdle. This time, is there anything, as I said, these numbers are favorable, and I personally, I'm not going to dwell too much on it because, the amount of information specifics is sort of sketchy at this point. Not a derogatory statement, but a timing statement because of you guys being new and the amount of work that you've been given. But from your feel, is there anything any expenses that you feel should be put a watch on that, you mentioned workers' comp. Are there any others that may be surprising to us that you would put a watch on? And question number two is generally, this time of year in the past, we've had, spending freezes, and basically with this size variance, I'm not sure that there's a spending freeze necessary, but that's my own assumption. what is your take on what the financial situation is at the end of these 7 months?
Yeah, I'm very pleased with how this looks, Rich. One area that I always that I always pay attention to, and again, it came up in the budget, is tuition for our special education, both private, public tuition. That the expenditures versus budget for last year, the expenses were higher than budget. And when this budget was being done for the 2025 year, not the one that we're working through right now, instead of the budgeted number increasing to match where our expectations were, it was actually lowered. So this number here, this 4.3 million, is actually lower than it probably should have been for this year. So we do see a negative variance here. And that is partially offset by the amount of tuition, special education tuition for public schools, but it is always something that I look at, because some of the placements for special education can be quite costly.
Mhm.
But overall, no, there's nothing that's jumping out at me. And in respect to a freeze, typically, from what I've been told in the past, spending freezes, typically that conversation comes up in March and April, as we're approaching the end of the year. However, we are looking like we're tracking very favorable, at least in respect to salaries and benefits. So I wouldn't anticipate it, but we do have to be good stewards of our funds. So that's
Oh,
not to say that we're not going to watch them.
I appreciate that. It's sort of in a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation, because ultimately at the end, we'd like to come out with as close to a break even as possible, or have a nominal, favorable balance, but not too favorable where it becomes, a little hard to justify why you've cried so much for money and you haven't spent that much money, which has been some conversations at council meetings. So that's why I look at concern at the size of the variances, and pay close attention to these things as we get close
Rich,
to the end
excuse
of
me,
the
can
year.
you talk a little louder?
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was
Thank
saying
you.
that to me, the variances are important. But fortunately, we should be winding up with a positive variance, but too much of a positive variance comes back to bite us, because people then say, we haven't spent what we appropriated, and we were asking for too much, and it's all in the nonsense that we have. So that's why I look at these variance numbers very closely and try to gauge what the end of the year is going to be looked at. But that being said, in another couple of months, again, I would hope that we make more progress and continue cleaning up these variances and getting to know what's in the budget, so that so we can have a pretty good feel for what the numbers are in totality.
Yeah, and just to take note of, when you talk about spending freezes, I know a lot of our staff that purchase supplies will typically wait to the end of the year to spend their money, and then they have the spend down before the freeze comes. And that's kind of why, if you remember on the first page, we had a $1.1 million favorable variance in supplies. And I said that's driven by two things, really: instructional supplies and some timing of our utilities. But you'll see here on just after page 4, in the top of page 5, this $485,000 favorable variance in instructional supplies. And when you think about a $160 million budget, putting a spending freeze on supplies really doesn't make that much sense, because the majority of our expenses really are
Sure. Yeah.
staffing and benefits.
You're talking pennies relative to
Yep.
to the pennies
Yep.
relative to the total. You've explained, when I look at your page number, I think it's number 9, where you lay out the monthly the expenses. For this month, when I saw the $8 million, $8.6 million spent, And these are actual, actual expenditures with no accruals. And the months prior are, talking in double digits, close to $15-16 million. That's a big differential. So, part of that difference is attributed to your adjustments.
Yes,
And-
this is what you're talking about here, Rich. Yep.
Yeah, right. Mhm. Okay. Sure, if you don't mind, I can't see them, so if you could.
No, I initially just want to ask regarding the special ed, and all the cutting on budgeting, if it's what's going to affect this budget overall, but you explained it as far as I understand, it should not be a concern at this point.
Right. It's just something I'm always always aware of, just because the nature of some of those placements, the dollar value can be very high for single placements.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to add, one of the things, Richard, that I think it's important, when I see such a favorable balance in the salaries and the benefits, we know a lot of that's due to the open positions, but also, when we made a lot of moves into Alliance, in this time around, I think we were very conservative with estimating, how much staff we can put in there. We're able to slide, a fair amount of staff in there, utilizing the appropriate strategies that were given to us, the boundaries by the state, which created a little bit of extra room. So one of the things that I'm looking at right now, and I'm working with Mike, is, we have, I don't want to sit on so much salary money when we could be supporting some of the schools, and maybe even getting a head start on some of the things that are critical heading into next year. And so there's a few positions that I think that we should be getting started with, things that were already in the budget for next year. But we don't want to close the year on $8 million in salaries, for support. So I think, we're going to have some conversations about getting some of these supports to the schools up and running in advance, I think, if we can, because I don't want to see us close the year on a ton of salary and benefits when that could be used to support things that are happening now.
I agree. It makes us look bad in terms of our budgeting,
Yes.
and then, one year we come up with a huge favorable, and next year, we're asking for more money. So that basically it leads one person to say, gee, you guys
Exactly.
know, what you're doing. I was just going to comment on those open positions, or is the practicality in terms of what you're hearing relative to the industry overall being tight.
Yeah.
For teachers, for subs, and all the other categories, is a lot of that still prevailing, where the lack of supply may lead us to not be able to fill those positions, although we can afford them, and therefore wind up with a good favorable variance.
That's part of it. I think some of the funds that are there that are available are in part due to the open positions, but I also think that we were able to absorb, Alliance grant was able to absorb
Right.
more positions than we anticipated, so it created a pocket, some room.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to mess with us with a little bit of breathing room at the beginning of the school year, but as the year ticks by, and here it's February. If we still have that pocket and room, there's definitely some schools and that could use some support, and I have a few in mind. But also, there are positions in our current budget for next year. So I'll give you a quick, for example, and I don't want to derail the meeting, but we're in the process, come this spring, come June, we have to move DHS science wing, all the staff, all the equipment. CRC has to go over to the West building. 43 Beaverbrook gets moved. This is all equipment, people, everything. 63 Beaverbrook moves. We have 1,400 students, desks, their equipment, and all of the things, and the teachers that go with them must be moved over in June. And at the same time, we have to have a hiring process that is larger and greater than we've ever had, probably in the last 10 years. So we have to find a way to onboard and start hiring the staff that are going to be set for the academy. If we wait till July 1st, that certainly makes it a lot more difficult in the midst of all that disruption. But so there's a few positions I think that could help get that process started early. And there's also a few schools that are, I would say, I'm not gonna use the word on fire, but they can definitely use some support right now for sure. So we'll continue to monitor this. But like I said, I'd hate to sit on $8 million in salaries when it can go to use.
Sure, no, I agree. So long as we're on the right track and feel that, the numbers as presented, we can justify and do that. So I agree 100%.
Thank you, Mike. My concern is the purchasing at the last minute. Being a city employee, we have to get our purchases in. I mean, I think supplies are very basic. You know what you need pretty much, by springtime, what you're going to need in the fall. And I think there should be a early date to submit supplies requests. So because this seems to hold up our books into next year instead of closing our books in a timely fashion, because you have outstanding purchase orders. That's what I'm getting at. We really should be more mindful getting those orders in as by a certain date, and not so much into the summer. Like by May is what the library has to do. So, and I realize you've got a lot more buildings to consider, but still, I think everybody can have a good idea what they need for the fall.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the reports that we were able to find in our system in Tyler Technologies is called a PO aging report. And it shows, how long certain POs, all the various POs have been opened. And we do see that at the end of the year, there are people that put POs in for the current year. And I think that goes back to an old thought process that doesn't really exist anymore, is, hey, let's wait for the last minute, and whatever we have, we'll just hurry up and buy. But you're right, that does add a significant difficulties in the year end. So exactly what you said is what we talked about, that in May, listen, if you need something, supplies in nature, please let us know, put the requisition in, we'll approve it and order it. Otherwise, we shouldn't be entering POs in on June 28th just to earmark that money, because if it's not really a liability, then we can't encumber that money. That's a great point.
All right,
Thank you.
Any more questions on the financial statements? If not, then let's move on to the grants.
Yeah, Angela, I know you're on here. If you want to jump in at any time, you can. I'll give an introduction. So this sheet here is what we've been reporting on previously, certainly since I've started, and it essentially lists each one of the grants, what the budget was, the year-to-date amount spent, the encumbrance, and kind of the budget balance. And as I was running this report, after I ran it a few times, I said, well, it's kind of confusing because some of these grants are 1 year, some of them are 2 years, some of them end in December, some end in May 31st, some of them have other different dates. And then to further that, it was pointed out that some of these are state grants, some of these are federal, some of these are private grants. So we knew now for some time that the way that we report our grants kind of needed to be changed. So as I was discussing this with Angela, Angela said, well, I have a great idea. I used to keep track, just as you're saying, in the other district I was at, and it seemed to be very helpful. Why don't we kind of repeat that here? Let me put everything together. It took some time, and then present it to the board and get their feedback. And that's what we did. So we've included both of them. This is our report here that we usually have. It's the last 3 pages. But the report I want to look at is the new one. And this is, let's see, this is page 10. And essentially it has your entitlement funding. So your first section here are your grants. It has listed out whether it's state or federal, who the person is here that kind of oversees that, the award period, the length of the grant. So whether it is, like I said, that 1 year or 2 year grant, or perhaps something else, the date that it expires, and the current budget here. And I think maybe the only piece that we might want to add to this is year to date, what we've expended so far, so we kind of know where we are. The second column here is the carryovers. So from the previous year, if there's any carryover, again, listed the grant. Here we'll see that these are all federal, but again, to the extent that we have the person responsible for a grant listed, the award period, the length, expiration date, and what the carryover budget was. And then lastly, there are some miscellaneous grants that we had listed here. We tried to keep it consistent with the grant type, the person, period, length, expiration, and budget. So with that, I turn it over to the board, unless Angela, you want to add anything on.
You know what? Can you pull up the one I sent you through email? That's the one I sent to Rich last week. We separated federal and state, subtotaled those, and made a grand total column, line at the end.
Pulling it up right now.
Yeah, okay. So under the entitlement, we separated federal and state, subtotaled those. Carryover is all federal, subtotal that, and miscellaneous. Rich called them local, so I added that and gave it a grand total.
So this further,
Can we have that, can we have that chart?
Yes,
this is the most recent that I've asked Angela to modify with the subtotals on each of the categories. But previously, I think it was in the last meeting or in the conversation I had with Mike and Angela about trying to, and we've had other discussions periodically with the committee members talking about somehow breaking up the grants in terms of categories, so we had a better feel. But this, what Angela has done, has been fantastic, because it takes into account, conversations that I've heard where people wanted to know what the period was, who's responsible for it. So, I tend to think, with the exception of, and I agree with Mike, maybe we could add to this another column that's the year-to-date actual. But this really gives us a tremendous insight as to the grants and who's responsible for them and the period endings. And this is something that over the course of time, we've been talking about. So I'm very happy and thank Angela for this work.
you're welcome.
But first, I would think that in terms of going ahead, I off the top of my head, we don't have to make a clear decision tonight, but the first summary could be made, and this one can be continued to have, because it's already referenced, just adding a final column next to the budget as to what the year to date has been so far. But again, we can talk about that in the near future, that how we want to modify this further, or collectively from the committee what they'd like to see in terms of the reporting. So I'll leave that as a final thought for you, and then you can get back to me with emails as to, you know, how you'd like to see the formats presented. But I think we've come a long way from taking into account conversations that we had, putting something together. I'm very happy, appreciative of
Yeah,
this.
it's great job, Angela. I think this is exactly what we were looking for.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Thank you.
and it also goes to show, you know, when you look at the amount of money that we spend for education, it's not only the appropriation that we get, but it's the appropriation plus it's the grants that we add to that, plus it's how much the city, you know, spends on their maintenance and things for us. So it's when you put those numbers together, there's a lot of money that we put together in the city here to educate our kids. And sometimes we don't, you know, really support that number or show just how much we're spending on education, with the caveat that we're not spending enough. But that being said, does anybody have any comments on the grant summary? If
So
not-
I would just like to say that the grants and the identification, the category, Angela and Mike, it's great. It's great to see this because over the last 4 years, as committees and board members has asked to have this formatted like this, and it's taken almost 4 years to get to this point. So I just want to say thank you.
Yeah. You know, to your point, Gladys, I haven't been on the board as long as you have, but when I first got on the board, being a private industry, I thought the transition in understanding when you make a recommendation to its fulfillment would be quickly, you know, or reasonably quickly as it is in private industry. And then after 17 or whatever the years I'm on the board, it's a slow process, you know, to really get something, to get something changed or to get something done. But as long as we're making progress, I think that's a good thing. So job well done, guys. I appreciate it.
It was all Angela.
Okay, but even on the statements, Mike, I know the audits have taken a long time, and getting familiar with the, you know, with the district being new, the pressure you've been under, you know, I think we're getting there. And it's so important to me that we have the numbers under our belt and be assured of them, because we're at the same time we're coming up the presentation to defend our own budget, and so I think that's very important, that we know where we are as opposed to where we want to go.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the second item on the agenda that I have is audits. And the reason I put the audit on there, I know you get tired of hearing that the audit and the 23 audit was completed, but my point was, in just I think it was last night, I couldn't make it. There was an ad hoc committee on the audit committee, which I believe Mike attended. The reason I put this on is because the 24 audit is to be completed, and we don't have to have monthly updates on the audit, but since it's a very time-consuming man-hour type of venture, I think it's important for us to know the status periodically as to where we stand on that. So that's why I just stuck it on here, knowing that we had the ad hoc and Mike could fill us in on any information last night that was pertinent. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Dr. Casimiro and I attended the meeting last night. And it was the first part of it, at least, was Scott Bassett, who is the partner at RSM, presenting a slide deck on the actual audit itself. I have a copy of it If anyone would like, I could make a photocopy, or Rich, if you'd like to come pick one up, I took one for you as well. As far as the audits go, um, in respect to DPS, the only thing that was mentioned was a material weakness for Danbury Public Schools, and that was relating to the cyber incident, which keeps coming back to us. So, and that's just to note the control process that the cyber incident happened. Other than that, there were no major findings for DPS. The meeting was restricted to talking just about the 2023 audit, but I think it's a good idea to for us to present and just let you know where we stand. The next audit will be 2024. We're hoping to kick it off shortly. We expect that to be done within 6 months. The city has their team fully staffed. We've bridged a significant gap in building a relationship between the finance team at the city and our team. We currently host Joanne Stirk, who is the assistant over there. She was here today. She's here, tries to be here at least once a week. And her and I and Angela talk on a daily basis to try to get these requests fulfilled as quickly as possible. And while we were doing the 2023 audit, to the extent that we could, we were getting the 2024 affairs in order so that when we do kick off shortly, we're ready to go, and we can make that 6-month deadline. So I think there will be a final, Scott Bassett said there will be a final audit report issued either Thursday, which is tomorrow, or Friday the following day. And that should be available for public release.
Well, Mike, let me ask you, the issue of bank reconciliations, is that progressing so that they're getting to a point where they're almost up to date, or where do we stand on?
Yeah, so when I first found out that the bank reconciliations weren't being done, the closest that I saw that one was being attempted was back to 2021. There was a one done for the financial audit in 2022, but it wasn't by month. We worked with CLA, who is our audit partner, to help us get those done. They did 23 for us. There are, as you know, or may not know, there are several bank accounts that that we reconcile. In addition to having all of the student activity accounts, which are kind of on the side, we have separate accounts for educational services, a separate account for school lunch, a separate account for grants, and then DPS General Fund has 2 accounts, one for operating and one for payroll. So those are the 5 accounts that have to get reconciled, and each one of them are reconciled by month now. And Devin, who is the individual from CLA who's helping, he is up to date on the 2024. The plan is we have someone here that's we have under an agency contract, and she's helping with a lot of the minutia, but she's also helping with the audit work. The idea is to have her trained by the individual at CLA on how to perform the bank reconciliations. And then when we can finally backfill that position, have her train the new person so that this never happens again. And then they'll be reviewed on a monthly basis going forward. So yeah, very, very pleased to have just about 2 years worth of bank reconciliations done in a few months.
So it's still a work in progress to get us up to a current situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'll always be, you know, we'll always be lagging about a month behind, just
Right, which is
due to
normal.
timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I have is, there were some conversations earlier, way earlier in the year, relative to schedules, payable schedules, trial balances, and some negative comments relative to the district in terms of the inability to have these subsidiary records, you know, reconciled to the control. Has that been at least cleaned up, where you're comfortable that the subsidiary records are at a point where it can tie out to the controls?
Yeah, well, a big part of that, Rich, was actually the bank reconciliations not being done, because what was happening is there were transactions that were hitting the bank that were not hitting the general ledger. So the ledgers that were being reported to the city weren't accurate because the entries weren't done. So as we clean up these bank reconciliations, we're doing the entries so that they're ready to go. The other thing is Joanne at the city has access now to our financial database, so she's able to see and make sure that the numbers on their side and our side tick and tie. So yeah, no, they will that will not hold us up this time. And in addition, in speaking with RSM, the auditor, they were asking in the very beginning for the trial balances, and the city has asked that we are able to deliver the trial balances at the second portion. I don't know if you remember, no, so not during the initial findings, but kind of in the audit work and the field work as we go. So I think we're very very well poised for this audit, and there's nothing that I can see that would hold us up past that 6-month part.
And none of the adjustments or any material adjustments that are going to affect any of our numbers so far, correct?
So for 2023, there was a balance in the educational account. Right now, it's about $7.9 million favorable, and that was due to some entries that were put in that were subsequently reversed when we actually closed out and had the statements audited.
Okay.
Teresa, excuse me, Teresa's been had her hand up for the longest.
I just want to be clear. The 2023 audit is done. Is that correct?
Yes. We
And
will
that's
have the
what's
final
good.
report on Thursday or Friday from RSM.
And now we've started the 2024 audit, correct?
We haven't kicked it off yet, but it is coming very shortly.
Why isn't it kicked off?
There needs to be an engagement letter signed between RSM and the city. So as soon as they're done issuing that, they'll, I guess, the city and RSM will come together, get an engagement letter and sign, and
Okay.
then we'll do the kickoff.
Okay, so we're done with 2023, so we're good. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why I put that on there, Teresa, so you could sleep nights. All right, the next
I
item.
want to make sure I understood. I didn't get that wrong.
Yeah. And Gladys keeps saying, why do you keep putting the audits on there when it's over? So the next item on the agenda is what I refer to as the reserve summary. The reason I asked for that was not necessarily, Mike, that you had the schedule tonight, but I think it's important that we as a district and as a board get a reconciliation between what the district and the city of Danbury has as a reserve number by specific items. And the reason I say that is, one, we should be in agreement with these numbers. Number two, you know, it's my personal feeling that we're over reserved on the insurance, but that's only an assumption on my part. And thirdly, depending on where we end this budget year, it may be, if we need funding, that may be something. If we have reserves in there that are not necessary for us to keep as reserves, we may be able to request them, you know, to be part of an allocation to us to mitigate some of the differences, if there are any. So that was the reason for it. And if, whatever your timetable allows, if you and Dan can get together, reconcile it, and then present that schedule to us, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
The other account is the non-lapsing funding. We had talked last committee meeting where Kim had indicated that the restrictions on that were quite complex and stuff. I think Kara indicated that we were going to hold off on funding that. Right now, at least my last estimate was about $2.1 million that we could, once you make the entry, put into that account. where do we stand on opening that account or getting close to funding it on your comfortability of the financial statement?
Yeah, so the account is open. It is in the same institution that the rest of our accounts are in. It is ready to be funded. And I think it was last meeting, perhaps the one before, where we said we were going to wait until we began this audit and really got a much better understanding of the 2024 final number to make that transfer.
Okay. All right, so it's still a work in progress. The next item, I guess I addressed to Dr. Casimira. As we stand right now, with the uncertainty of the appropriation that we were asking for, are we still on target to open the West Side campus next September? Or do you think there are, or at this?
I mean, so unless I get an indication from the city otherwise, you know, we have to open that building. You know, and we're slow rolling, slow rolling up the grades. So as I mentioned before, instead of going, you know, all grades 10, 11, and 12, we're doing grades 10 and 11. That cuts back a little bit on some of the staffing, so it kind of saves a little bit. Not a ton, saves a little bit. And then it also helps a little bit with the busing. Although the kids, you know, the kids are still here, whether they're on either campus, but there could be some cost savings there. But, you know, we're definitely, you know, I haven't received any, you know, kind of word yet at all on what the, you know, broad numbers could be. You know, I know that there's folks working very hard to do everything that they can, but it remains to be seen. You know, our funding levels will dictate our ability to move forward with a lot of things. So
And as of right now, we're still on schedule.
we're still on schedule. I'm operating as if we are opening. We have in my mind, there's no plan B.
Nope,
You know,
that's fine.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And the next question again to you is, with all of the publicity that you're hearing on a national level about the Department of Education, the possibility of federal funding being there and not being there, is there anything that you've heard that's definitive, or is it still business as usual until we've heard?
Yeah, well, you know, we're on pins and needles a little bit with hearing if there's, you know, what else is developing. We know that there was a college, Sacred Heart University, got a program kind of wiped out from underneath them because it was very much focused on you know, diversity and hiring and special education. So I think they lost several $millions. But you know, right now we haven't received anything. What we have received is a letter that most districts have received, which I'll be sharing in the board packet. It's a dear colleague letter from the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, that basically states that if anybody is engaging in any related DEI activities or makes any decisions based on race, hiring, scholarships, supplements, extra supports, you know, admissions, testing, anything, that they could lose their funding. We have 2 grants that by just by the name of the title alone would probably be flagged, and that's the Increasing Educator Diversity Grants. We have 2 of those. We've contracted with a teacher residency program that has taken a long time to get off the ground. The state has been very slow to, so this teacher residency program that we're supposed to use has been now available. We've contracted with them for a couple of teachers. It's like maybe $50,000 a teacher. We've signed a contract, so you know, I think we're on the hook for that. But yet we haven't we have not been invoiced because the program hasn't started. The program doesn't start until the end of the year. So it remains to be seen whether that money gets clawed back, or if it's your money, but you know, if you spend it, you can get yourself into trouble. So we have a lot of questions. I have a list of questions that I'll be sending to some of our state representatives. We accepted money for a grant for an Ed Rising program, which is also kind of part of a minority pipeline. I don't know if that's going to continue to be funded. So I'm just trying to tread, we're kind of in a holding pattern with treading on further committing to programs because we don't want to sign contracts and do things if the money's not going to be there, or if it puts us in jeopardy for federal loss of federal funding. So, you know, I had some other superintendents calling me. I had some other folks in districts calling me just yesterday and today to talk it through. We're all sort of in a similar boat. One thing that's interesting to note is that, you know, I know that there's been some things out there written that Title I wouldn't be affected. However, Connecticut, Title I and the entitlement grants, Connecticut overlays an additional layer in the grant. And I know this because these are some of my grants that I operate. And they make you sign, you have to have an affirmative action packet on file with the state, all of your assurances, they're called. And so we have that. And whenever we do sign off on any of the entitlement grants, I have to sign and attest as an insurance that we have an affirmative action and that we follow we follow that edict. And I don't know, you know, if Connecticut's going to have to reissue their grants and minus those assurances, or if that's going to affect the money, the pass through from the feds. Again, all remains to be seen, but you know, we're in a bit of a holding pattern. The letter that we were sent states that we have 2 weeks to review our policies, grants, third-party vendors that we might be dealing with that engage in DEI practices. So a third-party vendor could put us in jeopardy for their practices if we sign contracts with them. So I'm not sure how, you know, we have to go back and look at all of our contracts to see what their mission and vision and mantras are for their practices. But it's very complicated, and you know, we're working through it.
It's horrendous. In addition to the possibility of loss of funding, we've got man-hour law to do
Oh,
stuff.
it's incredible. It's incredible.
I thank you for the update. And, you know, it was just something that because of the current events is very, very current. And so I appreciate the update. And as you move along and know more, just keep us informed.
You have a hand up. I think Juanita has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you're feeling better, Kara.
Thank you. Thanks.
So a question for you. Are you hearing anything out there, or are you aware of any unfunded mandated programs that may be coming down the pike that may affect our budget?
Unfunded mandated programs. Well, there's a lot right now in legislation. There's a bunch of things. You know, it's hard to really know what has legs yet. You know, just yet. There's a lot of folks, you know, testifying on special education. There are some things. The paraprofessional. There was something on the table around paraprofessionals that the minimum salary had to be $61,000 to pay a fair wage. I mean, even what we're proposing in our budget doesn't even get close to that. I don't even think we're at the halfway mark there. But something like that could be pretty big for us. But like also most other districts, it would put people out of business. And so those, while they're scary in terms of the financial cost, because they're so extreme, and they don't, you know, there's no phase in, they usually don't get enough traction to get voted in. But there are some things on there, and I can go back and look. There was nothing on there that jumped out just yet, but there's so many bills on the table right now, and they morph through the course of the session based on testimony. And so we'll know a little bit more as the session comes to a close, what looks like it has some teeth.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions before we move on? If not, my last question again to you, directed Dr. Casimira, with regard to a budget, what I call advocacy plan. Have you scheduled any presentations to groups, particularly as you did last year and such a great job, to the ad hoc committee of the council or the council and other people to, you know, enlighten them about the budget and get more support for our budget. Is there any timetable or events that you have currently put together or will put together?
Sure. So we just recently did a presentation through in conjunction with with the citywide PTO. So some folks were able to watch that, and it was videotaped, so that's been circulating around a bit, which is good. I would like to see that linked onto our website. We have, I know Mike Seelig is not on, but we wanted to schedule at least two community conversations. I think we're going to talk about that in the community relations subcommittee, to have a community conversations in the same manner that we have done before, to do one in English, but then also to host kind of a multicultural event where we have, we're chock full of translators and folks that can help with translating, so that we're able to reach more of our parents. I have at my next admin council meeting coming up with all of the administrative staff, we have a presentation going through there, and then of course I have something planned for the internal school system as a whole. But I think what's going to be key, I think, this year is as we get closer to the citywide presentation, that's when I think some additional opportunities to engage. The other thing I'm doing is I have some appointments scheduled with individual schools to work with principals, but then also to be available to the staff members as well, for open dialogue, just conversation, mostly around a budget, but just to kind of hear concerns that they have, particularly around climate and staffing, which are very big right now. So I think in the community relations committee, I think the goal there is to identify some dates and some other events out in the community that work for the board and also work with my schedule.
Okay, great. One thought. Years ago, Sal Pascarella, I remember during one year had a TV. We did it somewhere in the building, or at the high school, I forget where he filmed different subjects with different people. And then it died. It never resurrected after that. Maybe Ken knows the medium and how to do that, but that may be, it's a thought, that may be something where you could do the presentation of the budget there and put it on a website so that it's, that people could see it and
Yeah.
again,
Now,
reach the audience.
sorry, Rich, you just triggered a memory. Last year, I sent a community letter out, and I embedded the link to the city council presentation.
Mhm.
And I got so much of a response from that, from the parent, because they clicked it. It was a letter. It was kind of an all call, please kind of watch the video. And that went over well. And that might be, I definitely would like to replicate that. And we were able to send it out in multiple languages. We did our folks at the registration center did the voiceovers. That was important because, all of the community heard the budget. So that's another thing. But I agree, one really good, well filmed presentation gets a lot of viral traction and can be posted on multiple sites. So I think that might be a really good strategy.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Is there, to the committee members, are there any other questions that you want to have relative to the agenda tonight? If not, I don't know. I thought I saw Al, but if there are any other committee, non-committee members or board members who want to ask a question, are there any out there who has a question? Okay. If not, then Mrs. Cooper, before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I see it's 7:05 and I had 7 items on the agenda, so I kept it within 5 minutes after 1 hour. So I spoke quickly, try to be as efficient as possible.
You did great. It was great.
Can I entertain?
And I just want to say that the superintendent did a presentation to Citywide PTO, and we had a workshop before that, and I really enjoyed the presentation made as citywide PTO. And as I spoke to her about it, and we talked about that presentation and how it was very clear, and it came to me, and she says, well, you know, it's hard to try to manage the meeting and, you know, keeping up with people. And I really got a good feeling and understanding at that presentation. And I just want to give kudos to her and the way she presented it. And Mike was there. And I forgot to announce Juanita, and I forgot Juanita was on the thing. And Juanita, I'm sorry. But it was a good presentation to citywide PTO.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Could we entertain a motion to adjourn? Come on, Teresa, give me one.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Great, thank you.
Wait a minute,
All in
who
favor?
moved? Wait a minute, hold
Juanita.
on.
Juanita moved.
Okay.
Favor?